Hello and welcome to today's session of the Connect and Grow Coffee Talks podcast. I'm very happy to have Gien with me today. We know each other from last year in Vienna, but to be honest, I already know you from the DDD Europe 2022 because I joined your workshop, which I really liked. So I was very happy that we met last year in Vienna again. And
Thank
we're
you.
here together to talk about leadership in software design because you're going to have a workshop at the DDD Europe about this. But before we dive into the topic, would you like to say a few words about yourself?
Yes, so my name is Gien Verschatse. I'm a consultant at Artling right now. And I also, in November, I co-authored a book called Software Design, Collaborative Software Design, with two other lovely people. And it was published in November, finally. So very happy about that.
Yeah, I already read it and I really liked it. So I can definitely
Thank you.
recommend it to everyone who is like into facilitating of collaborative modeling work in this area. So yeah. So my first question, as we're talking about leadership and software design, would be like, where did the idea for the workshop come from? Where did the need for it maybe come from?
Yes, so as you said, I teach other workshops in most of the time strategic or tactical domain-driven design, as they're known. And we also always get the question, but how do I convince people to adopt domain-driven design in the company? How do I do that?
Yeah.
Because I try to, and it's just not working. So the idea sort of started from that question, but then also in the book, we say facilitating, which also means that you have to take leadership on to
Yeah.
sort of get that collaborative software design going. So I added my piece there, and I thought actually that would be a really nice workshop just on its own.
Yeah. When you're talking about leadership, like what would you define as leadership?
That's a very interesting question. It's also a very hard question. So
Yeah.
first of all, so leadership for me is someone who's willing to take charge around a specific project or around a product or around a
Yeah.
decision that has to be made. So leadership for me really is a role. It can be permanent. It could be a part of your job. We have team leaders. It's in the
Yeah.
titles most of the time, but it could be very temporarily as well. It's saying that we have to make this one decision for a code. We have to do this refactoring, and someone has to take charge, and I temporarily take charge of that. So for me, it's very broad.
Yeah. Yeah. I also like this definition of once you have influence, whether you want it or not, you're in a leadership role. So
Ah, yes,
yeah,
that's
slightly
also a
goes in
good
that
one.
direction. Yeah. So you said, okay, the question came up from, okay, how do I convince people to adopt domain-driven design? How does this differ? What would you recommend to people depending maybe on their role, whether it's like, for example, a team lead or rather normal software engineer maybe in a role? Does that differ?
Yeah, so most of the time, what I talk about is how do I convince people? It's very hard to convince. So
Yeah.
often we think as if we're in a leadership sort of role, we need to have all the answers to questions, and we need to be able to speak fluently and convince other people of our opinion. As a consultant, I thought that for a long time as well. But over time, I'm sort of more going to the lead by example. Like this is what I believe. This is my
Yeah.
opinion. This is why I believe it. You are allowed to question that, and I don't try to convince you anymore. You have a different
Yeah.
belief system. You have different
Yeah.
opinions, and that's okay. As long as if you have to make a decision, then at the end we need to move away forward. So
Yeah.
I think leadership is also not that I have to convince other people, and whatever I think is that thing that must happen,
Yeah.
because I'm supposed to have all the answers. So I try to move away from that a bit.
So more towards like servant leadership.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just about supporting other people to make that decision, even though the end
Yeah.
responsibility is you, especially if it's in your job title. Like if you're a team lead and something goes wrong with the
Yeah.
team, it sort of, you get the blame, you're
Yeah.
accountable, you're also responsible,
Yes.
and you understand that. But it's still okay to say that, you know what, eh, I'm just going to protect my team. It's my but anything else we'll make as a as a group. I want to not make all the decisions. I don't want to dominate. Yeah, I think that's a bit lacking right now. If I look at the industry, I don't know what's your
Yeah.
experience in that.
Yeah, people are sometimes afraid to take decisions, or that's like what I often see. It's more this like, hey, yeah, people have opinions, but there's actually coming to decision. That's the hard, like, or that's what I often see. That it's less this. I'm here and I just decide that we're doing DDD, but it's more like, okay, hey, I think it's a good idea, but I want everyone to be on board. I still want to convince everyone. I want the buy-in of everyone, but I don't want to decide. And this, on the one hand, I think that's very good. On the other hand, I think that's also taking quite some time.
Yes, it takes a lot of time. Like I always say, there are different modes of making a
Yeah,
decision. You can go very democratic or very authoritative. Yeah, and
yeah,
authoritative is I make the decision and I tell you what to do, and
yeah,
that's where it ends. And the other one, you can go as broad and as narrow as you want. Sometimes
yeah.
we talk about proposals. So when we have a
Hmm.
proposal, we actually already selected one of the options which we think
Yeah,
is the right way
yeah,
forward. And then you say, if you actually see something severely wrong with my reasoning, we can
yeah,
look at it again, but besides that, we move forward, which is still democratic because people still get to say in it. Or you can
yeah,
say, you know what, I read about domain driven design. What do you think? And then you
yeah,
just throw it in the group, and you see what happens and how
yeah.
things move forward. Yeah.
Yeah. Also, sometimes it's just like, hey, let's just give it a try. Let's try it out and see how it works for us. If you have the surrounding that supports this.
Yeah. You mentioned, how do you see that differently depending on the role you have inside a company?
Yeah,
If you're in a form of a leadership role, I would expect more support. Like
yeah,
I want to try this out, domain driven design, but I
yes,
would expect learning opportunities, some budget, room to make mistakes. Because if you're learning something
yeah,
new, no matter what it is, there has to be some room to actually learn and to grow in there. While if you're a software engineer, it that budget you can't, you're low,
yeah,
but not low, but
yeah,
there's no budget. It's pretty much all on your own, so you have to
yeah.
look at it from a completely different perspective, because that's what I used to do, right? I was a software
Hmm.
developer, and I tried to convince people that, hey, we have to
Yeah,
use technology X for this or this reason, or we have to do that.
yeah,
But you're asking people something, you're asking them to get out of their comfort zone
yeah.
without any, well, you don't have the power to
Need.
back it up, because you don't have
Yeah,
that title leadership, even though you're temporarily taking leadership
hmm,
over a decision. And so you have to do them in a very different way. You have to, like, as a software engineer, it's far easier to lead by example, do
hmm.
small experiments, not experience, but experiments, and not just say from, yeah, but these are the reasons, and you just make a
Yeah,
statement and you just assume that everyone will go along.
yeah.
Eh,
It's also probably crucial to put yourself in the other position, like when you're talking from software developer perspective, probably to your product manager, for example, you have to take another perspective to be like, okay, how much money does it save? How much resources does it save? Maybe how much value or how much speed does it maybe bring? To put yourself in a different mindset. And that's probably also something that people struggle with.
Absolutely. There, most of the time people try to convince people that
Yeah.
they're right, but that's not how it's supposed to go. As you
Hmm.
said, you need to show other people that investing their time to do this or to learn
Yeah.
something new will be worth it. Eh,
Yeah.
and especially towards, what we call in general the business or the
Yeah.
the product people. It's not that easy, because honestly we don't know that much about what they do. So you need to
Yeah.
have a keen interest first. See, how do you work, what kind of tools do you use,
Uh,
and maybe we can use those tools, because in the end, domain driven design is the mindset for me, and whatever tool you use, you can use it
yeah.
um,
Yeah.
for that. But if you say we're going to start using technology X, for example, in a company I had, event sourcing was really pushed
Hmm.
onto it, and we had a lot of
Yeah.
pushback from the maintenance team. But
Yeah.
also, we had no idea what maintenance did. And I
Yeah.
have to confess that, 12 years ago, I was not who I am today. So I also did
Yeah.
not try to figure out like how does maintenance work, how do they have to
Yeah.
deal with all these systems. And so our decision was severely lacking because we had not thought of the consequences besides in our own team. And there we
Yeah.
wanted to do that. So you have to go
Yeah.
broader.
Yeah. Would you say that's like one of the most common like pitfalls or mistakes people do when they like want to convince people, for example, to introduce domain-driven design or any other tool or technology?
I'm not sure. Like it's battling with another one. So
Yeah.
yes, I think trying to imagine what am I asking here for people to
Yeah.
do is a thing that we're missing a bit. I think the other one is that, and a psychologist explained it to me like this. Okay? So she said, Hien, you have conditions and you have
Mhm.
problems. And problems are things that you can solve. It's within your
Mhm.
power to solve them.
Yeah.
Conditions are things you have to live with and you can't
Yeah.
change them. Doesn't mean that nobody can change them, but you cannot change them.
Hmm.
And then she said, you're bashing your head against the wall because you're trying to solve conditions and you just can't do that. Okay?
Yeah.
And so making sure that
Hmm.
it's a problem and not a condition, just make sure
Yeah.
that you can actually take up that temporary leadership, that you can actually
Yeah.
do that. And I think
Yeah.
when you're a software developer trying to convince product or higher management, you can try, but it leans more towards a condition than to a
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah.
And if you say, okay, higher management does not want to do this, so if I want to do domain-driven design, what can I still do within my limited scope of influence that I
Yeah.
have?
Yeah.
And like I can use the tactical patterns. I can try
Yeah.
experimenting with event storming a bit with the business if I find someone
Yeah.
who's willing. But the fact that the company will adopt domain-driven design is not
Maybe
something that
not.
you can do.
Yeah, yeah. I also like this circle of influence to be aware of your circle
Yeah.
of influence, what's inside of my circle of influence, and maybe what's outside, and also maybe what I can do to increase it, maybe to actually have influence on the upper management as a normal software engineer, maybe.
Yes, but that is quite, yeah, it's quite difficult to get there
Yeah,
sometimes. If you're
yeah,
in an enterprise, then
yeah.
probably you don't even see those people.
Yeah, and maybe also it's also a field you don't want to get into because it's too far away from what your actual expertise is about. So yeah, totally. To get more into like, okay, what is like maybe what is one thing that people who are still in the mindset will would be like, okay, but I really think this is the way to go. Like domain driven design is the thing that my team would help the most. What would you recommend them to do? How would you recommend them to approach it?
So first get knowledgeable. It depending
Yeah.
on where you're at. If you said I saw
Hmm.
this talk and it was
Yeah.
great, versus I read the book and I want to try
Yeah.
it, versus I actually done some workshops or we
Hmm.
did it a couple of companies ago and I actually would like to introduce it here because I thought it really helped me. So
Yeah.
depending on that, how you approach it would be very different. If you have experience, then you can show use cases in which it was very beneficial.
Yeah.
If you are just starting out, you can find someone to
Yeah.
come along with you. Just one person. Like I
Have
heard
coffee
about
with
this.
people.
Yes. So the way you approach everything will really be different. Like if you're in a
Yeah.
leadership role, as in it's my job title, what we notice is that if you want to start spreading messages, slogans work
Yeah.
really well, for example.
Okay. Yeah.
But also not don't bombard them with 20 or 30. You just pick out a few essential things you want to focus on right now.
Hmm. Like, for example.
Like we want to talk to the domain experts. You say that
Okay.
that's something because most of the time everything is so broad. If
Yeah.
we're talking about those type of decisions, should we swap methodology? Should we
Hmm.
introduce a discipline in our company? If you're and
Yeah.
DDD is very much a discipline. It's a
Yeah,
mindset you're trying to introduce, and that's very difficult. Either way,
yeah,
if you're trying to change people's minds, it's very difficult.
yeah,
And as I mentioned, maybe you just don't try to change their mind. You just explain your
yeah,
reasoning, and they
yeah.
can come along or
So,
not.
yeah. So start small, like you said, with a few slogans, with a few like principles or things you would like
Yes.
to adapt.
Same if you have software designing and try to improve the quality of
Yeah,
code, the quality of your architecture, no matter where you
yeah,
are. I go to these companies and they sort of like, ah, but we have these principles and standards, and they show me the documents, and it's like pages upon pages. And it was like, yeah, this is
no, no
not
one can
going to
remember.
work. No, pick out
Yeah,
one or two things, create some sort of, I don't know, campaign around it, and really make
yes,
sure. And once you see that, hey, this is no longer something they need to learn,
yeah,
this is something that is inside people now,
yeah,
then try to find something else.
yeah.
So
So it's
changing, yeah,
one step at a time.
slowly. It's very slowly. Changing people's minds is a very slow
Yeah,
process.
yeah, yeah. It's a whole, I mean, it's a whole different field of change management, where you need a lot of patience as well. Yeah,
Yeah. I've noticed like another thing, and I don't know how it is with you, but if you can show people you have generally thought about it,
mm-hmm.
like, well, I don't know if there's an alternative to domain-driven design, but if you have the status quo, and if you can show like I really thought about this decision, I really invested time into
Yeah,
analyzing it, and I do believe this is the best way forward for us right now,
yeah,
especially if you have an architecture or a design that you want to move towards. And if you say, like, look,
yeah,
I have 3 or 4 possible solutions, I think this one is the
yeah,
best. Just saying, like, this is it, and that's what we're going to do. People are
yeah,
never going to accept that. Why
yeah,
should we?
yeah. Yeah, no, I would totally agree. Like showing that it was not just an idea that you woke up with in the morning and be like, "Hey, that's the new silver bullet that we have to use now." But be
Yeah.
like, "Hey, there are," and also being open for like, okay, there are downsides, and there is no silver bullet, but I think because of these and that reasonings, it's better than what we do now, for example.
Yeah, definitely. Because if you don't, that's when you start getting resistance. And once you
Yeah,
have resistance, it's very hard. Like, I would say you should stop, but I think it's natural to
yeah,
resist something when no explanation has been given as how someone in a leadership role, people feel that I shouldn't explain myself because
yeah,
I have authority inside this company.
yeah,
But the truth is that if we would do it reverse and say, you now have to do this without any
yeah.
extra information, they wouldn't accept that either. And it took me a long time to understand that.
Yeah, I mean, it's also if we were, I mean, if you want people to come along with you and actually to adapt that mindset and to think on them, like, and take decisions on themselves in like alignment with what you maybe want, and you need them to understand the decision and the reasonings behind, because otherwise they will be just blindly follow you and do whatever you say without like putting up their mind themselves.
Also, yeah, people need to convince themselves, I think, is the best way to put it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great closing word as well. I realize we're already talking for quite some time.
Mhm.
So I would say thank you very much. I really
You're
learned
welcome.
a lot again. I think it's a very interesting topic. You can deep dive a lot more. So if anyone is interested, come to the DDD Europe, join the
Thank
workshop,
you.
also read the book. I can definitely recommend it. And I would say thank you very much for joining.
Thank you for having me.